One of the things I'm interested in is kind of what work do these visuals do in either fitting into that narrative that lets us falsely line up identity, religion, and territory in a simplistic way, and what work can they do in making that more complex?
My expectations were completely smashed when I arrived to Ukraine and see these kinds of uh, characters and such. I was absolutely astonished at the level of do-it-yourselfness, and it is sort of a mix. It's like this strange, demented mix between self-defense and performance. This is a class of people who have been completely pushed aside, forgotten. The government has crushed them. They don't care about them. They don't give a shit about them. And that this was their way to sort of take hold of their identity, take hold of their manhood, take hold of something that was very personal to them, and then sort of be able to fight for it.
I think the protesters just had such a monopoly on the types of images that they were putting out there for the press, wearing sort of the makeshift uniforms with all kinds of personal touches and helmets and just homemade things of all sorts, shields, whatever they could get their hands on at the time. It was amazing to watch how quickly they were able to get standardized shields and helmets and uniforms and so forth. In the matter of a couple of weeks, they had full-scale production going on. They morphed into what they were fighting visually. They started picking up the shields of the riot police and using those, and with the standardized camouflage uniforms and patches and things. It was really interesting to see.
I think it shows the raw physical power of and strength in numbers. I think that's one of the connotations of this image, that these young guys may not be well armed, but they're acting together proves to be more powerful, at least at this moment and within this particular shot, than we could imagine.
Yeah, I'd say this is one of the few images that I've seen that actually show sort of the riot police, the Berkut, really under siege and retreating, and the protesters surging forward. And of course, you have a great perspective, or the photographer does, from the side of the Berkut, with the protesters rushing forward. Usually you'd be seeing this maybe from the opposite side, or the situation is so chaotic that the lines aren't as clear.
The two riot police are in full uniform, specific helmets, Kevlar jackets, no doubt well armed in some capacity, and they're up against these guys still in their variety of makeshift helmets, flimsy plywood shields, sticks, and so on, that look a little bit like reenactors doing something somewhere. It's a moment of vulnerability in the state. As a result, I would see that actually, in terms of the protest movement, as quite an empowering image.
Well, I think that it's very reminiscent of a lot of film imagery of mindless drones who are launched by a dictator to suppress a people's rebellion. I'm thinking back to 1925, Sergey Eisenstein's classic Battleship Potemkin, where we have these soldiers marching uniformly down the steps and slaughtering civilians, women and children. We never really see their faces. They're basically this robotic brigade that is suppressing the rebellion.
One thing that I noticed straight away is that it's actually from the other side. It's from the other perspective. It's from the police perspective, which is something that you rarely saw from Kiev, and we were always led to believe that it was this massive army of protesters. But when you look here, I love just the little specks, the little dots on the snow hill, but it's an army of police.
I do like that it gives a little more proportionality in terms of what the size of the force the protesters were facing. Usually seeing the side from the protesters, you just see this line of shields and riot helmets, and you don't necessarily get a sense of quite how large the force was that they were up against. And it makes it all the amazing that they were able to do that, or had the courage to do that and go up against these people with their makeshift arms and weaponry. I think we were all very intrigued by the images we'd see every day during the protest of priests giving mass, and they were very present throughout these protests, walking out in front of the protest lines. I think what we started seeing was so many images like this that we felt like there was a certain degree of theater going on here. You know, someone's receiving confession. It's not typically something one does in the middle of the street in front of 100 photographers. So you have to look at these a little bit skeptically at some point.
From the images that we get, mostly they seem to have aligned themselves with the protesters' side. So we get this additional symbolic layer that religion is giving some moral authority to the protesters.
It's really tough to say what role does religion play. I think in this case it's sort of using it to whose ever advantage at that point. So it's these kind of polar sides within the same side, so to speak.
In some ways, the religious aspect is the introduction of a third interlocutor or different institution into the conversation.
The image raises a question, at least for me, you know, what is he confessing of? Is it something that he has already done, or his intentions? So there's this very kind of poignant moment, I think, that signals to us the sort of the ethical, the moral dimension of this confrontation. That it's not just about against this army of drones, but it's brother against brother in a way. And the old lady who appears to be chiding the soldiers or the police is probably appealing to them to treat protesters as people rather than outlaws